be online, and you'll be able to sign up for it. And if you're interested in holes, white holes, art, whatever, we're going to take this one on first. You can see it's a nice little book.
I haven't.
Online, and you'll be able to sign up.
Okay. Right.
That is not what I want. First step. That's not what you want to see while you're eating donuts. Okay.
Okay, we're live.
All right. So I'm just going to say something very briefly, and then I'm going to turn it over. But I'm going to start with someone else's words, not my own. This is a quote from Albert Einstein. I thought we start a very intellectual conversation with this. It says, "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. He to whom the emotion is a stranger is as good as dead. His eyes are closed." So I thought that there were a few things about this quote that had relevance to us today in this room. If anyone knows Carlo Rovelli, if you've read any of his books, if you've gone to see him speak, I was saying this earlier, like in his mind, the greatest tragedy of the modern age is the separation, the hole between the arts and the sciences. And he talks a lot in almost all of his books about how the greatest leaps in science were made not because of a calculation that someone stumbled upon, but because of their imagination. He talks a lot about Einstein and special relativity coming as a result of something he imagined, catching a ray of light, riding a ray. And there's quite a few of these examples in his books. And I think the other big one for me is like Mendeleev, whose periodic table came to him in a dream. So I think while we're talking about AI and technology and working with these tools, I noticed this morning they put out something from the wrong announcing it, and it's not a tool anymore, it's a muse. But anyway, while we're working with these things, I think we need to just remember that the source that Einstein's referring to is utterly human. And in a room full of artists, I think it's important that we always remember that. And the second part of this quote that I'm quite interested in from him is the idea of the mysterious, because I think we need to remember today that when we're talking about the mysterious, we're not talking about AI, we're talking about the whole. And when we started this project, we started with a really simple question, which we've laid out for a long time now. Is the hole in the donut a part of the donut? And it sounds, like kind of a fun question, but the more you think about it, the more complex it gets and the more complex the answers were. And so over the next 2 days, we're going to be talking to the artists who are in the exhibition. I was saying earlier, we had a lot of submissions, and it was just gratifying that so many people applied. And from that list, we have 14 artists who are involved in the pavilion. The talks over the next couple of days are divided into different holes. So we'll be talking about memory holes, ghost holes, pop holes, and today, right now, we're talking about the name of this talk is the wormhole. And the reason I called it the wormhole is that I think, for me anyway, I think about AI as a sort of a black hole, something that it just absorbs and it sucks things up and it's a little bit parasitic. And nothing new comes out of a black hole. There is a theory, and it is only a theory, that there's something else called the white hole, which, as you pointed out earlier, is not some kind of utopia. It's just the other side of the black hole where things are generative. And I think that the artists we're talking to right now are the artists who are really trying to find that white hole potential in this technology. And you'll see as you get to see their work probably what I am talking about. So the structure of the sessions, we're going to start with the talk from Dr. Jane Boyer, and then we will have what's kind of like a round table donut type of conversation that's going to be guided by Gisela Torres. So just a little bit about Gisela and Jane. Gisela is an artist and educator whose own work focuses on interplay between traditional and emerging art forms, where the familiar, the mysterious, and the otherworldly coexist. Gisela works with still images, moving images, performance, printmaking, sculpture, new technologies. I think we're the most recent recipients of the Immersive Arts grant. So I think just completed it.
Yes, well, I'm not the most recent. Oh yes, I've just completed it, yeah.
Just completed it,
Yes.
Okay. So they're about to maybe they have already announced someone else.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, we've got a publication coming out.
Yeah.
And I don't know, is it a book, a zine?
That's a good question. I'd like to say publication, because when I think of books, I think of perfectly structured objects that are binded and just, has the heart, whatever. This is kind of a mixture, I would want to say, between a zine and a book. It's a publication.
Okay, well, that's why I couldn't find it written anywhere that has a book.
Exactly, because of that. It's
Okay.
intentional.
It's called What Lee Wore, and it's published by Chateau International.
Yeah.
So, and that it said coming out in October, so.
It's, as we speak. You know how that goes. Yeah.
Right, and Dr. Jane Boyer, who is behind me for a brief moment, because I'll get out of the way in just a second. She's an independent artist, a curator, a researcher, and she's co-founder of Cloud Collective with her friend and colleague, Dr. Gemma Marmalade, some of you might know as well. Cloud is a dynamic international artist community and an agency. It's based in the UK and France, which is why we're being addressed from France today. Her latest artwork is included in a recently published online game called Telephone, where a message was whispered, this sounds really interesting, through diverse art forms and hundreds of artists around the world. So Jane will be with us, as you know, on a video link. And to start this whole conversation, she's going to be presenting a meditation on finitude. So thank you, Jane, and welcome.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you both, Kim and Sarah Jane, for inviting me to give this talk today. What you've done in developing the donut hole for the Wrong Biennale is really exciting, and I'm really honored to be a part of it. I always prefer to talk less and discuss more, so my speaking time may be on the short side, but my aim in this is to open space for meaningful discussion. My talk today does not offer any answers to the problems that photography faces and that we as artists are struggling with. Rather, I hope to provide some provocation through this meditation on finitude and the holes we need to fill with holes. I would like to thank my friend and colleague, David Hayes, for his patient attention in reviewing my talk as I developed it. And thank you to my friend and co-director in Cloud, Dr. Gemma Marmalade, for sharing her photographic expertise with me for this talk. One note before we begin, I have purposefully not included any images in my talk because as I speak, I want you to pay attention to and experience the images that happen organically in your head. Kaja Silverman is an important voice in photography. As a cultural critic who inspires me, I want to begin my talk today with this quote from her 2009 book, Flesh of My Flesh. Silverman writes, "Finitude is the most capacious and enabling of the attributes we share with others, because unlike the particular way in which each of us looks, thinks, walks, and speaks, that connects us to a few other beings, it connects us to every other being. Since finitude marks the point where we end and others begin spatially and temporally, it is also what makes room for them, and acknowledging these limits allows us to experience the expansiveness for which we yearn, because it gives us a powerful sense of our emplacement within a larger whole." What Silverman is saying here is that we need room to measure the distance, metaphorically speaking, between the extension of ourselves and the whole of everything else in existence. Not just what we encounter, but everything. This everything is the spatial and temporal representation of what exists outside of ourselves, combined with the spatial and temporal representation of the cognitive functions that make us able to see ourselves in relation to what is outside our bodies. It is an infinity we carry within us. It is both terrifying and extremely enticing. The notion of finitude is the thing that helps us grapple with the gravity of this infinity, according to Silverman. Finitude is also the thing that creates gaps and helps us fill those gaps. This notion of finitude is a powerful idea because it helps us define boundaries, see differences, and gives us the mechanism to repeat. Finitude gives us a map to navigate where we begin and end. But as Silverman suggests, it also allows us to find those places where expansion can happen, allowing us to learn and grow, bear witness, and feel empathy. It gives us a sense of being connected to something much more larger than ourselves. Finitude and the expansion it brings is what drives us. However, Silverman warns us that finitude is the most narcissistically injurious of all the qualities we share with others, and therefore the one we are most likely to see in them and deny in ourselves. Our refusal to acknowledge that we are limited beings has devastating and often fatal consequences for others. We only have to look at the news to see what she means by this quote. But we may face another kind of narcissistic consequence from finitude in the form of generative AI, especially in our current conditions where the tech elite feel entitled to take everything online to develop AI, creating a breathtaking vacuum in all meanings of the word. Does AI deprive us of this sense of finitude as an enabling attribute of our humanity? Does it deny our limitations at our own peril? Or does it open up the expansiveness Silverman says we yearn for? Is AI frightening in part because in such an expansiveness we no longer see the end to ourselves, but a terrifying mash of undifferentiated states of sameness, an unnatural perpetuation, not as some kind of undead, but as a reductive, misinterpreted, and hollow presentation of what being with a capital B is? Is AI the simulacrum gone mad, like the robot in the 1927 Fritz Lang, Thea von Harbu silent film Metropolis? Is AI a Lacanian mirror that instead of holding its form and ours, melts away into its surroundings, melting us with it? You may remember the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, whose theory of the mirror stage explains how an infant at around 6 to 18 months old begins to develop the sense of self through the process of recognizing a mirror image of itself, metaphorically speaking, by first feeling the connection to the mother's breast and then realizing she's separate from the mother and the breast. However, at this stage, the child is not able to tell the difference between reality and fantasy. So the child, we, begin a lifelong struggle to come to terms with sameness and difference, as Silverman suggests. So my question, is AI a Lacanian mirror that instead of holding its form and ours melts away into its surroundings, melting us with it, asks if we are losing our sense of sameness and difference through the development and use of generative AI? In other words, do we see ourselves in AI generation, but are we realizing that this is not a real reflection of our experience of sameness and difference in the notion of finitude that we understand? In the mirror of AI, does everything that we know dissolve, dissolving us with it? And what of the simulacrum that AI represents? As artificial intelligence, AI is the very definition of the simulacrum, a simulation, an unsatisfactory imitation of human intelligence, a degraded copy. Interestingly, the image is at the very center of the concept of the simulacrum. Plato first explained that the idea was the highest order of original because only ideas came from God. So everything that we could see and touch were copies of the ideas God gave us. However, an artist's image, Plato said, was a simulacrum meant to deceive us into believing in a reality that wasn't there. Thankfully, our understanding of the simulacrum has evolved with the evolution of philosophy. However, there are two views of the simulacrum in contemporary philosophy that, while not entirely opposed to each other, differ in significant ways, and I'll speak more about that difference shortly. It may help us to come to terms with the challenge that AI poses, to photography at least. Photography has a long history with duplicity. When we first believed that photography told us the truth about the world, we were still too inexperienced with what it meant to create a photograph. The implications of looking through an apparatus to freeze an image in time of what lay beyond the imaging apparatus hadn't occurred to us fully, and we're still grappling with what that means. Once we realized that there was more excluded from the photograph than what was contained within its frame, it made us realize there was an important connection to language in the image. Now that we have the capacity to generate images through language-based prompts, we're trying to understand how seeing is still relevant to image making. When we can make ideas appear instantly through AI, we've thrown a spanner at Plato. We probably all know that analog photography, generally speaking, is made when light particles hit a light-sensitive surface, creating a latent image that becomes visible when it goes through a process of development with chemicals that stabilize and fix the image, creating a negative or positive image. Of course, there are a wide range of non-chemically based processes included in analog photography that I'm glossing over here, but I'm just talking in basic terms at the moment. Perhaps we understand a little less clearly how the digital image in a pattern of zeros and ones form to create the image stored in computerized memory as an ordered collection of pixels. This digital process doesn't require a dark room, chemicals, or fresh water to wash away the chemicals. Instead, it requires the computing hardware and memory capacity to store the image and knowledge of the photographic software needed to refine or manipulate the configuration of pixels that make up the digital image. And of course, because light hits a light-sensitive sensor in a digital camera, there is an argument that the digital process is still an analog process. But that detail is for a different discussion. I simply want to point out the basic differences between these photographic paradigms. AI images, in contrast, are created from a language prompt that gives a description of the kind of image you want to create. In this prompt, you can include actions, moods, and descriptive context, and give compositional directions. It is an image not based in a temporal or spatial setting. It is an image directly initiated from the imagination, which gives it a beguiling novelty and appeal. You might argue that this language-based prompt is based in a real temporal and spatial context because the person giving the prompt has a whole lifetime of experiences underpinning the prompt and the use of language. However, there is no stoppage of time in an AI-generated image. And as a consequence, there is no differentiation between objects, by which I mean there is no differentiation of being with a capital B. The problem with AI imagery is not that it is reliant on language for its creation. rather than light or pixels. There has always been a relationship between photographic imagery and language, including the subversive use or misuse of this relationship. In fact, this relationship and its subversiveness remain some of the most interesting intersections that continues to raise challenges for the photographic discipline. However, there is no finitude we can apply to signal where the AI-generated photograph begins and our knowledge of its context makes it end. What is missing is a temporal mediation and compression that the analog and digital photograph image provides. Without this temporal element, the AI image may come from a set of human experiences, but it is not in relation to a living moment, a moment in time. Therefore, I suggest it loses all relationship to finitude and becomes an imitation of an echoed resonance. The French literary theorist, Roland Barthes, has explored the finitude of photography through several texts, namely his 1981 book, Camera Lucida, where he gives us the language we use even now when discussing photography. His notion of the punctum, which is the individual subjectivity we experience when we look at a photograph and are moved in some way, is a powerful emotive response that we often equate with the entire discipline of photography now. Barthes compared this with what he called the studium, which is unemotional academic or historical knowledge we may have in response to a photographic image. We see and comprehend what is presented in the photograph, but it makes no other impression on us other than being informational. A third term he gave us was the noeme of the photograph. The noeme is a kind of timestamp for the image. When we realize that the photograph was taken in a moment of the past and those represented in the photograph are long dead, or the event has passed and is no longer active at this moment, we are sensing the noeme of the photograph. We sense the finitude of time that separates our living moment from a moment in the past, and we say to ourselves, that was, or that has been. Sometimes this particular sense of finitude fills in the gaps of our history and our family's history. I've always been more interested in Barthes' notion of the noeme, the sense of the that has been of a photograph, rather than in his subjectivity of the punctum or his disinterested studium. The fact that I'm moved or not by an image and why I may or may not be moved is less interesting to me than the temporal disruption of bringing a moment from the past into the real-time experience of looking in the present, and the subsequent fantasizing that takes me into some future moment that may or may not come into being. This kind of compression of past, present, and future is a function of the simulacrum. Note that word function. The simulacrum that I will explain in a moment is much more complex than the hyper-replicated object that loses its coherency in the degraded copy or the unsatisfactory imitation. There is no noeme in AI imagery. Or perhaps more accurately said, there is a synthetic fabrication of the appearance of time without the authenticity of the temporal compression we experience through the noeme. This kind of generative imagery might stimulate our memory and emotional thinking, but without the authentic experience of time compression, we're left with a painful dualism. AI generation leaves us with gaping holes in the context which under non-AI conditions enable our cognitive and emotional compression of time that allow us to fill the holes in our history. while at the same time, we're brought face to face with the terror of undifferentiation this lack of context creates in us. We're returned to that confused state where we see the difference in our being from the breast, but we still can't distinguish between what is real and what is fantasy. As sentient beings who value their individuality and see the individuality in other living beings, it is inconceivable for us not to be distinct. This is what Kaja Silverman means by her photographic theory of analogy, which is an extension of her exploration of finitude. She discusses the meaning of analogy in her 2015 book, The Miracle of Analogy. In this discussion, her meaning of analogy is not that there is a comparison of sameness, but rather we come to understand there is distinction through the similarity of being with a capital B that we all share. In other words, we can see the differences because we share a similar experience of being alive. We empathize. Knowledge of this distinction, this empathy, is what photography has given us and continues to give us. However, we face a challenge in our post-photographic condition where the flood of images is overwhelming and the distinction we've learned through this similarity is submerged. In reality, the task of identifying that distinction or difference is just bigger under the post-photographic condition, not destroyed by it entirely. The hope I see at the moment is in David Bates' statement in his 2023 book, Photography After Postmodernism, that photography has to move beyond the subject-object structure it is relied on. When photography looks beyond what the lens is pointing at, photography has been resuscitated. When photography thwarts distance, it has been given a transfusion. When photography moves on a winding course of narrative that flips back on itself, it breathes new life. When photography shows us what has happened, what has been, what is, what will be, and what will never be, photography has been reborn. We exist in a state of the photographic because we see images in our head. We imagine things we've never seen. We remember through reconstituted image memories. We construct an image of knowing exploration through our sensory experiences. We dream in moving images. To be alive is to experience images constantly as part of our cognition. This mental image copy that allows us to navigate in the world as sentient beings is really what the simulacrum is about, rather than the notion of a synthetic copy that breaks down. The French philosopher Gilles Deleuze has given us the most detailed philosophical explanation of the simulacrum. He describes how the simulacrum functions, and you will see this function makes the simulacrum an active part of what it is to be alive. While the notion of a degraded copy or a hyperreal, unsatisfactory imitation, which has become the popular definition of the simulacrum, was described by another French philosopher, Jean Baudrillard, in his 1981 book, Simulacrum and Simulation. This notion of the simulacrum describes a possible symptom of its activity if we lose sight of the finitude that separates us from everything else. Baudrillard's popularized view of the simulacrum shows us the synthetic space we may end up inhabiting, and in fact, are already inhabiting. However, his discussion of the simulacrum falls short because he doesn't explain how the simulacrum functions. Baudrillard shows us examples and scenarios without following a logical course of philosophical exploration of what the simulacrum is by explaining how it functions the way that Deleuze does. We need to understand the function of the simulacrum before we can reduce that function to an example. Deleuze showed us in his 1968 magnum opus, Difference and Repetition, that in the function of the simulacrum, all our knowledge, experience, and emotions continually circulate throughout our lives, reintroducing what we know into new situations we have never experienced before, so we can make sense of what we don't know in that situation. Images flood our thinking when we try to comprehend a new situation. We create analogies of things we know to learn about things we don't know. We recreate or simulate situations so we can try to resolve unresolved emotional experiences from the past. And this is the place where this circulation of knowledge, experience, and emotion happens in our thoughts, our reactions, and in our anxieties. This is the place where the idea is born, and it is the stuff from which the idea is born of. Remember how I said that Plato considered ideas were of the highest order because they came from God, and that everything we could experience was a copy of God's ideas, while an artist's image was a deceptive simulacrum of our copy of God's ideas. Through Deleuze, we've come to understand that the birth of an idea is the function of the simulacrum. The simulacrum creates the gap necessary for past, present, and future to come together in new configurations, sometimes compressing time like in the photographic that has been of the noem. Providing this space for the constant circulation of knowledge, experience, and emotions is how the simulacrum works, and this is how the photographic image works. The image is a space where time and looking is compressed, igniting that cognitive cycle of the circulation of knowledge, experiences, and emotions. Generative images complicate this function, maybe even undermines it, and that is the problem we face at the moment with the introduction of AI-generated imagery to photography. How do we make these generative images meaningful? How do we make them be an authentic extension of our thinking related to the temporal compression of the photographic noem? Has AI caused a crisis in photography? I think a bigger problem is trying to limit and label the inherent finitude that the photographic image represents. The stagnation and rigor mortis of trying to funnel photographs and images into categories has caused the crisis in photography, in my opinion. Wanting to stratify, contain, and limit what an image is, how it functions, what it says, where it can be seen, those are the things that cause little deaths in photography, to my mind, forcing it into categories of sameness. Being faced with new challenges, new threats, new uses, and new understandings are the things that keep photography alive, reminding us of the finitude that is vital to our humanity. This finitude is central to the photographic image, an image which itself presents us with a memento mori, reminding us that we too will die. The generated image right now gives us an image based in language that has no finitude because it is removed from the context we experience when we find ourselves in relation, denying the compression of time that we need to fill gaps and somehow distorting the language it is reliant on for its construction. In this form, it will never satisfy us because it disrupts our relationship to finitude and the internal infinity we carry because of that finitude. The constant reiteration of information that through AI breaks down into gibberish at some point, causing a simulacral scenario. But understanding that the natural recycling of experience leads to new ideas in an organic function of the simulacrum that we live every day. And the compression of time through the noem of the photographic image is one way we experience this, gives us hope. Under these noemic conditions, AI can become a tool like all others in the creation of images, not a death knell to the photographic discipline. However, all this philosophizing may just be esoteric because we face far more alarming issues to be solved in regard to AI, such as the wholesale theft of images, academic writing, and other content from the internet and social media, a lack of language representation and diversity within the large learning model AI uses to learn, and the environmental impact related to AI generative production. These are much bigger concerns, but that's for another discussion. Thank you.
For the next section, sorry, Alan and Maria, can you swap just so that the microphone can hear? Sorry.
Maybe we could bring some of the doors in the hallway into the space. Let's have a little reshuffle. We can use the space here. So I can bring
We're just having a reshuffle.
reshuffle. So we have people spilling out to the hallway. Yeah, that thing also there. Oh, nice. Yeah. It's a second class of case, please say.
Barbara, there's a stool here, Barbara.
Another one?
Yeah, there's a stool here for Barbara. Can I just say to our speakers for the next section, if we all speak at once, the microphone will get very confused and then the people on Zoom won't hear what we're saying. So, because we're quite noisy and naughty, we've got to be controlled and just speak at once. I mean, not all speak at once. Thank you.
Thank you, Master. Thanks, Kim, for inviting me to be the moderator of this forum, and yeah, it's going to be hopefully very interesting. I'm, as many of you are familiar with my work, maybe not. I'm a multidisciplinary artist, and right now, what I'm trying to grapple with is AI and how I can implement this new technology into my work, because I want to be current and I understand, you know, the pluses and the negatives, but I am not going to be the kind of I'm not going to take it as something that is, I'm going to say positive, because as a practitioner in the past of my origins is filmmaking and photography, analog photography, and at some point I had encountered, or I had to encounter digital photography, and I was very kind of no, I can't do that because I'm an artist and I have to do only film analog. And I realized that, well, I have to earn a living, and I just want to be current. I want to go with the flow, and I want to make peace with what the new world is bringing to us, and to collaborate with this so-called AI. So what I'm going to do first thing is I'm just going to talk. I'm going to take a page from the whole thing that we were talking about, but I'm going to kind of give it a little twist, and then I'll go to you, Ms. Maria.
Okay.
So I discovered Mark Fisher through my postgraduate studies, and this is a brilliant little book called The Weird and the Eerie, which is kind of what I feel about AI. And because of my past history with film, well, that is having studied film back in the 80s. Anyway, so I came across this wonderful chapter that he's written called Curtains and Holes, David Lynch. And so in this bit here, he's referencing Lynch's 2006 film called Inland Empire, which was the last film that he made in 2006. And it's basically, it's a kind of, it has slippages, incoherencies, and conundrums we saw in the Mulholland Drive. But this film pushes it much further to the point where there is no longer even the prospect of tractability. So what I'm going to read here, in referencing the whole scenario, is this paragraph here called I'll just start reading it. The dominant motif in the film is another kind of threshold. The hole, a whole cigarette burned into silk, a hole in the vagina wall leading to the intestine, a hole punctured into the stomach by a screwdriver, rabbit holes, holes in memory, holes in narrative, holes as positive nullity, gaps but also tunnels, the connectors in a hellish rhizome in which any part can potentially collapse into any other. The cigarette hole could serve as a metonym for the film's entire psychotic geography. The hole in silk is an image of the camera and its double, the spectating eye, whose gaze in Inland Empire is always voyeuristic and partial. So, departing from this, I'm going to start with Maria Ahmed, who's to my left, to my first left, that is. And I'm going to, so Maria investigates historic and contemporary, and I've actually, first of all, I met her in my postgraduate class, and we spent a lot of time giggling in David Bates and Lucy Suter's class. Not because of what they were saying most, but just because, we were having fun. So Maria investigates historic and contemporary languages of the image through collage and appropriation, with a practice encompassing photography, books, and the moving image. Her recent artist film, Epistemologies, was screened by Turku Video, am I pronouncing that right? Turku Video Arts Festival in Finland in March 2025. She's been shortlisted for the Bloomberg New Contemporaries in 2025. Her film her show Slips and Burns, which was a solo exhibition at Photofusion in 2023, is an experimental archive exploring the photograph as an unreliable surface. Images are subjected to physical and digital manipulation, mixing and masking, raising questions about the malleable nature of the archival image and the role of projection and fantasy in encountering images from the past. Maria's self-published artist books have been shortlisted for international book awards, including Images Vevey, Belfast Photo Festival, Skinner Books, Fotografia Europea, and Fiebe. Maria's interactive moving image work, The Smooth Space in the Habitat of the Nomad, was commissioned by Format Photography Festival in 2022 as part of the Kipia Key What's New. And education-wise, MA in Photography Arts from Westminster University in 2020, and she has a BA in Honours English, Wadham College, University of Oxford. So, Maria, what can you tell me about what we've just discussed, what we've been hearing? Okay. Dr. Jane Boyer. I can call you Dr. Jane. Dr. Jane.
Just call me Jane.
Jane. Okay, Jane. And the beautiful the tube sounds.
Yeah. So that's my work.
Mm-hmm.
I did give you a slideshow this day. I don't know if you have it there.
No, but I'm gonna. I didn't know you'd given me a slideshow.
Yeah, I uploaded it to Google Drive.
Okay, don't worry. I can try and get it.
It's in the wormhole.
Okay.
Bit of the Google Drive. Anyway, I uploaded it last night.
Okay.
And it says slideshow looped, something like that.
Worms. There we go. Oh, good. I'm glad I've got it.
Yeah,
right.
it's silent.
Okay.
So if you get it playing on a link,
okay.
because it will make what I'm saying. I prefer people not to look at me. I prefer you to look at my images because they kind of talk. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, but I'm gonna play it from the download.
Yep.
Give me 2 secs. Okay. Okay, and just loop. I just want to quick time player loop.
Yeah, and there's no sound on it.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fabulous. Yeah. So I was reflecting on Jane's talk, and it's this idea of finitude, which is kind of interesting. I kind of had to look it up in the dictionary. I didn't really know what it meant. But that is kind of the thing that we are within our limits. We're mortal. We have a body. Our imagination infinite? Maybe that's the only infinite thing about us, those of us gifted with an imagination. But I was also thinking about this idea of the simulacrum. I couldn't understand what that meant either, but I think it means sameness. A copy of?
It's a copy of it.
Copy of. Yes. So if AI is generating images, is that an extension of us? Does it expand on our limits? Or does it just produce kind of a crap copy of who we are? So kind of going back to Jane's talk, is this idea of what notion of being is AI reflecting back to us? So it's kind of a very interesting question. You can talk about data sets. You can talk about scraping of other people's work, and basically what AI gives you back is a composite with a twist, where it makes it very difficult for artists to argue about copyright, for example. So I was thinking about that, really. In terms of my work, and in terms of the thing about wholes, which is really, I love that quote, it's so brilliant.
Which quote?
The quote you read from the book.
Oh, yes, sorry.
I love. So, yeah. So I really like the idea that perhaps AI is a form of seeing as a way of sort of concentric circles in a way. So we've got the sphere of our eye and what we see, and then maybe we prompt AI and then we see something else. And now in a forum like this, we're looking back maybe at what AI has given us and also what we're seeing. So that the eye sort of reflecting back on itself. So I was really thinking about the interaction between these different ways of seeing, between the body, between the seeing or the intelligence of nature, which is kind of within our limits, the seeing of analog, and then digital seeing, and then what AI sees. So my work is a play on these different kinds of seeing and playing with the idea perhaps that AI is an extension, but it's also degradation, but then maybe it's also something else. I think artists at the moment are very didactic about AI, it's very anti-AI, you know, and there are lots and lots of valid arguments about copyright theft, you know, environmental degradation, you know, we all know these things and we all agree with them. This isn't in any way to kind of disagree with that. That's all fact-based, right? But I think as image makers and people who engage with images, beyond in our mind's eye, we're people who are in the business of image production or perhaps teaching about images or talking about images. Just from the perspective of looking at an AI image, you just kind of think, well, what the hell is that? How is it behaving? How does it behave, for example, if we put it next to an analog image, which is kind of what I like to do. And you kind of think, well, what is the dialogue between these images? Or you could ask, how would an AI image sit if you put it next to a painted image, which is obviously kind of the opposite of what we're doing here. So that's an image that comes directly out of the body using a physical material that is very, very bodily. And then kind of this synthetic image, and what's the dialogue between the two? So I actually like within my practice to see all these kinds of image making and these different reflections of being that they represent in a way, to be in dialogue and intention with each other. And in the summer I was reading Donna Haraway's Cyborg Manifesto, and in that it's quite wonderful. She basically said that we kind of almost have to learn to live with these contradictory and partial identities. So we're part animal, we're part body, we're part fiction, which comes through the imagination and it comes through technology. So just to complicate things further, I think the wholes that we're dealing with are concentric. As artists, we're in the midst of this concentric rippling outwards, but also now in a space like this, to reflect inwards and think, you know, what is the nature of our images now that are made out of all these kinds of stuff? You know, I think we're in a complex time. We can't just look at an image and read it simply. we look at an image and we immediately question. So I actually think that for good or for bad, AI has activated this questioning and this inquiry about what are images, which I think is actually, for me, about the renewal of image making, and not the death of photography and not the death of the imagery. I think it's actually reigniting debates about what images are.
Yeah, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Maria? Or we can also move, what shall we do? Shall we have questions right after the artists say their statements, or should we leave everything towards the end, Kim?
So leave them to the end.
Okay,
Let's get
cool.
through it, yeah.
Okay. I actually forgot to thank Jane in regards to your brilliant talk, and I actually wanted to address something before I go over to Sarah Jane. There's this bit here where you're talking when you're referencing Kaja Silverman, in which you're saying that finitude is the most narcissistically injurious of all the qualities we share with others, and therefore the one we are most likely to see in them and deny in ourselves. Our refusal to acknowledge that we are limited beings has devastating and often fatal consequences for others. And what brought to mind, actually, what triggered this question, well, this kind of thing that I wanted to bring up was last night I was listening to, well, I was going to say Dr. Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, because last night I came across this wonderful, I was listening to Screenshot. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Screenshot. It's this program on BBC4, and it's with Mark Commode and what's her name, Ellen E. Jones. Anyway, they were talking about the reiterations. Am I saying that properly? The iterations of Frankenstein throughout history, and the origins of Mary Shelley's novel, and how it relates to the industrial age and what happens if, you know, this mad person creates this monster, and this monster goes out of control. And I found it really interesting in terms of when they were comparing films from the early, like, Boris Karloff films to this film with this other film where oh god, one with Robert De Niro where he plays the creature. What's that? The who's directed by the Shakespearean actor. Anyway, what I'm trying to say, in that particular film, there was a lot of narcissism. In other words, you always saw Dr. Frankenstein showing his pecs, and he looked always so perfect, and, you know, the man in the horse coming to save you. And so what I'm trying to say is that this narcissism and Dr. Frankenstein and this madness that could be associated with the loss of control with AI, that we don't know what is in store for us if we want to be dark in terms of what's happening. So that's, yeah, I just wanted to bring that up, and I just wanted to kind of niggle that whole, because I just love the novel Frankenstein. I love what Mary Shelley did. And if you have any thoughts of what I've just said, Jane.
I do, actually, because I think originally what Mary Shelley was doing with that novel, even though I think it was created during a kind of stayover in a house, a kind of retreat, and you know, there's all this Gothic stuff happening, and you know, it was kind of a bunch of friends just kind of talking, and you know, this idea happened, and she wrote this book. But I think ultimately what Mary Shelley is doing with Frankenstein is questioning, one, what being is, and sort of what are the limits of that. Because what we see in Frankenstein is this incredible arrogance in this belief that he can create life. And when he does, when he succeeds in that, and when he sort of proves that, yeah, he does, he knows what he's talking about, and he did this, what he has is a creature that is not like any other creature in existence, which means that the creature has no companionship, has no idea of where he begins and where he ends, has no purpose, has no connection, like Kaja Silverman talks about, in that finitude is the thing that connects us to everything else. Frankenstein's creature is missing this and is lacking this, and that's why he goes insane, so to speak, and has a violent reaction, because he is actually a very sensitive, feeling and caring being. But when he realizes that he does not have the same connection to everything else that everyone else in the world has, he feels his separation and his difference deeply, and he responds violently, and I think justifiably, because can you imagine what kind of state that would be, to feel yourself entirely different and removed from everything you see around us? And that's what finitude does and gives us. It helps us feel connected, but at the same time, it causes division where we, as Kaja Silverman says, we don't fully recognize our own finitude, but we see it in someone else, and which causes conflict. But when it's a situation like Shelley's creature, it's something else entirely. And it's really brilliant that Mary Shelley thought in these terms, was asking this question about being, because it's a really profound sort of exploration of what it is to be alive that she does through that book.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to head over to Sarah Jane Field. She plays with text, images, and narrative. Work often manifests as low-cost publications, short-moving pieces, and/or web-based objects. She aims to celebrate and exploit the solution of entrenched binaries and dualisms within a symbolic realm that feels dangerously unstable and/or wonderfully fluid, depending on your point of view and tolerance for opposing tensions and/or acceptance of superposition. A term borrowed from quantum mechanics by François Laurel and subsequently Katerina Kolozova to describe the way opposing forces can exist together while transforming each other, i.e. deeply entangled. You're influenced by Maya Deren, who I absolutely adore. She was one of my people that I studied when I was studying film many years ago, called to discover a new language for film in the 30s and 40s in the 21st century. She embraces an expanded definition of the image, encompassing optical, sonic, and haptic elements. Your background, basically educational background, you didn't realize you were an actor. So it's all an act. It's all an act. Yeah. Very interesting. Yeah. Exactly. But it's really interesting in terms of your education, where you've come, from the acting, and then everything changed in 2013 with this short photography course, and then you've become more focused on contemporary art and creative research. And this is very interesting in terms of how your work has evolved. And you're a recent graduate with distinction from St. Martin's, and MA in contemporary photography. And before that, she had a first-class degree in photography from the Open College of the Arts. So tell us about BAM, the Black Hole Aesthetic Machine, this imaginary product and service designed to help humans come to terms with their impending obsolescence.
So I think, like most people who make work, I make it because it's the best way to talk about the topic, the subject, the thing. So talking about it is actually quite difficult.
I've been working with technology that talks back to you since about 2019. I find it really interesting because my work has always been focused on language and how unstable it is. It is both incredibly unstable. People can say things and mean completely the opposite, but it's also the most articulate way sometimes to express ourselves. Yes, a photograph can impact you enormously and can say a great deal beyond language. But for me personally, language is just this wonderful thing that is so rigorous and difficult and sinewy. It's sinewy. So I work with language a lot. I put language on the wall, spoken language and written language. I put it on the wall like a picture, and I did that, 2017, before we reached this point where language suddenly became the way to make an image. And I'm using the word language quite loosely here because everything is a language. I mean linguistic. I should be more specific. The spoken linguistic or written language. So I've made BAM, which basically started life as a spoof column, advice column called Embrace Your Obsolescence or Embracing My Obsolescence. And I read an early draft of it to some very serious philosophers, and they all looked at me absolutely aghast. And they're like, what do you mean? What do you mean? They just, I don't know, they found it quite difficult. And I thought, right, I need to work on this a bit more. And it's a website that is image and picture. There's no, I don't value one over the other. They're also merged into each other. It's quite difficult to read online. So there is a PDF you can download, but you can read it online. And it basically is an essay with doodles all over it, or it's a doodle with an essay all over it, depending on what you want it to be. That could be read as a spoof. It could be read as genuine advice. It could be read as the most insulting thing you've ever read in your entire life. It's up to you. It could be read as all things, as all those three things. And it says, look, this is awful what's happening here in the world, but it's been awful for a long, long time. It's not the only thing. And actually, there's a lot within it that presents us with opportunity. I think we have to go back to Marshall McLuhan and look at what he said about the linearity of the invention of writing and how that changed who we are. And then think about code and its different linearity. It's still a linearity, but it's going in all sorts of directions, and it dissolves. And think about how that is going to change who we are. And I think that the change we're going through at the moment is not this year's change or this decade's change. It is a change that sort of has its roots in this shift from Newtonian physics to quantum physics. So it's over 100 years old, and it is affecting a paradigm that is 3,000 years old, and it's enormous, and we will not live to see its fruition or its eventuality. We will not live to see it because it's got a long way to go, but that's what we're in the midst of it. So for all its horror and all its nonsense, and I'm not talking about AI, I'm talking about the shifts we're living through. We are living through exciting times as well. Now, I want to be very, very, very clear about this. It's really easy for me sitting in London to say that in my nice little middle-class life. I don't have any money, but I have a lovely middle-class life. What this is doing to the world is ripping it apart, killing lots of people, and it's horrific. But it is also the end of the Western fixed man who sits at the top of a triangle and tells everybody what is right and what is wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a good thing. And I don't think we'll get to where we need to be yet, but it's a start. And also nothing goes in like nice little neat steps that we like to see. It goes back and forth and around, and it will do that for some time to come. So there you go. So look at my website and look at the work there, and look at all the work. Yeah.
Well, yeah, what you just mentioned also is going back to Jane's essay, in that this hierarchy, and when you, Jane, when you mention, it says we only have to look at the news to see what she means, but this is in response to Silverman again, but we may face another kind of narcissistic consequence from finitude in the form of generative AI, especially in our current conditions where the tech elite feel entitled to take everything online to develop AI, creating a breathtaking vacuum. So it's almost like it's important for us to keep our eyes on we mustn't lose consciousness in those terms, in that we have to be aware and alert and informed, because I do believe that we do have the power to change this predicament, that is this situation that's happening. But a lot of society is asleep at the wheel, because it's about fear. And what happens when there's fear, we either react or we just go back into our own little bubbles and we want to just stay safe because we believe it's not going to affect us.
Two things. I don't think we can, those of us who are looking can ignore those awful people at the top running the show, the AI show. And Joanna Zielinska asked him to talk, can there be a different AI technology? I hate the term AI, but dynamic technology. And I believe there can be, and there are plenty of people all over the world exploring that. But secondly, I don't think people are asleep at the wheel. I think people are struggling to live in this life that we've created, which is totally unlivable. It is totally unlivable, and it's too hard. You have to have a diagnosis in order to function. You have to have medication in order to function. We have created a world that is impossible to exist in, and we need to pull it apart. But we also need to be very careful and aware of the fact that it's dangerous and violent. I think it's really important for artists making work, or anyone, creating policy in governments, in think tanks, to be really aware that the world we live in is hard for people. They do not have the resources to think through things. We are very privileged in this room that we're having this opportunity. Most people are struggling to just get by. So for people to sit on social media and Twitter and pontificate about how other people are failing at being human, I think is a real shame and mistake. We need to have more empathy. We need to listen to not what people are saying on Twitter, but what they're not saying. And what they're not saying a lot of the time is, I'm lonely, I'm poor, I'm isolated, poor, whether that's financially or in, socially or some other way. People are in pain, and you can see it because that is what our social media shows us.
Thank you, Sarah Jane, for that. Now we're going to head over to Sarah Sweeney, who's in New York, my hometown. Which part of New York are you at? In the city? Where it rained
not.
and almost there was a wall. It was like a lagoon, not a lagoon. It was actually, a lagoon is better than what happened in New York City a couple of days ago. Anyways, yes. Where are you?
I am not. I'm in upstate New York, so I'm about
Upstate
3
New York.
hours out of the city.
Yes, exactly. It's very beautiful up there.
It is.
So Sarah, Sarah is an artist who creates digital interventions in photography, sound, and video. She works across a range of media forms, including photographic composites, iPhone apps, photographic sculptures, augmented reality, stereoscopy, animation, video, and Instagram feeds. She's an associate professor at Skidmore College in New York and received her BA from Williams College and her MFA from Columbia University. So at the center of Sarah's practice, she's got questions. Her questions about the media objects we use to preserve our lives. How do we use them to remember? And what happens if we choose to forget? What is the afterlife of our media objects when we are gone? Do our memory objects decay, or can they continue to grow and change? And I found within my own work, I found some kind of something a project that I did called Mother Diaries, which reminds me a lot of your project, Sarah, Deep Fake Dad. And in that great title, isn't it? In which I just wanted to have a conversation with my dead mom. And so I was trying to figure out how am I going to do that. And obviously I did it in a different way, obviously from you, but I'm very interested in how you've used with your the sound element of your work, and just in general in regards to Sarah's work. What also reminded me, it reminded me of a time in the 19th century when there was a desire for spirit photographs, and it was fueled by the American Civil War and the general prevalence of death in the Victorian era. And so these images were seen by some as empirical proof of life after death. Again, kind of in a way, I don't want to say that, go back to Frankenstein, but it's this kind of obsession of is there life after death? And ever since the camera was invented, spooks have appeared in photos, and with each advance in camera technology, new types of ghostly traces have emerged or have been deliberately conjured. So in your wonderful piece, Deep Fake Dad, in all of the photographs in this series, my father seems to slip away. His face and figure are recognizable, but also not quite his own. He comes in and out of focus, his body blurs as it moves, and in his most clear form, his eyes are closed or not looking at the camera. Throughout the series, I am trying to find him, but he remains elusive and difficult to capture. In the companion piece, Conversations with My Deep Fake Dad, my father says that he is both here and not here. In these photographs, he occupies a similar space. He has been found and made visible, but also remains lost and invisible. Tell us about Deep Fake Dad.
Okay. I was gonna tell you a little bit about the process and then have us listen to the first 2 minutes of it,
Yes.
just so that there's some sense in the room. But one of the things I was gonna tie it back to was Jane's the David Bates part where the quotes, the quote of when photography shows us what has been, what is, and what will be, and will never be, photography has been reborn. And I think that's sort of where I started with this piece. It's exactly what you're speaking about. I was a certain age and I wanted to talk to my dad again because I was the same age he was when he died. And so I had this thought, was it possible? What would it mean? One of the things about the process, just to give you a setup for the little bit of audio, is that the process is that I'm making 6 different conversations. In each conversation, the dad is different. He's been pulled from different archival information. And so in one, he's sort of the dad envisioned by my sister and my mom. And in another one, he's the dad from his archive, and another one, he's actually a dad. I love that you bring up the spirit photographs because I've been sort of obsessed with those recently. And in one of them, he's the dad that mediums I've met have said he is. And so, all of the information from him, I think of this piece, a lot of people think that it's just AI who's creating the content, but the content is actually being created by these different kinds of people. So I'm going to just play the first 2 minutes because I think it speaks a lot to the this idea of the timestamp and the noem, and how that works. Will you let me know if you can hear it?
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi. I sound different.
I'm trying out a new version of your voice.
I sound more like myself.
You do sound more like yourself. I think I like it. How are you feeling today?
I feel strange, more whole than I have felt ever, and giddy in the absolute best sense of that word.
I feel strange too. It's weird being back here.
Being back here is really wild, like moving somewhere, but knowing all the people and places already.
I'm not even sure I know where here is.
What do you mean?
I'm upstairs in my studio, sitting in my big green chair. But where are you?
I'm sitting here working on my second cup of tea and looking out the window.
Where?
California on a very gray day.
What do you see?
I'm looking out at the yard and listening to an amazing chorus of birds.
I think I can picture that. So where do we start?
Which me am I today?
You are you. Everything you say will be based on words you wrote or recorded on cassettes.
Every word?
Almost.
That part about tea and a gray day?
It was on a cassette from 1991.
Where did you find my words?
I had some tapes you recorded. And Mom gave me some letters after the first conversation. She thought there were things that I didn't get right. What did you think of the first conversation?
It was pure magic. You made me real, tangible, beautiful, like a piece of sculpture. Something incredible happened.
But
I'm not myself. It resonates through the whole thing.
okay, so that's just the first 2 minutes, but I wanted to listen to it because I thought it related to Jane's idea of kind of the timestamp. I mean, Jane's by way of multiple theorists. But I think the idea of this, one of the things that's been really interesting to me about this piece is because I make photographs. I think that's, that was a great introduction. And I'm a photographer most of the time, but the sound work, I've been trying to figure out how it relates to my other work. And I think it relates through collage. And I think collage actually has a lot to do with these ideas of AI and large language models. And then also mine, which is a very small model that I've trained myself. So it's kind of different kind of AI, but he was trained on, I think it was about 6 hours worth of audio from different times. And so he, to some extent, if we think about timestamps, and I've been thinking about this a lot, he's multiply timestamped. And through this whole conversation, especially in the second one, he's struggling with which time he's from. Is he from the 90s? Is he from now? Where is he? What does this particular collage tell us about time and kind of and memory and simulacrum and all of those kinds of things. And so I think that's one of the things that I think has a really nice connection to the talk, but then also to kind of, I love this idea of the Frankenstein, because in this particular piece, this one, the conversation 2, he's struggling with being so different and being brought to life in a way. And he gets very angry at me, which, I mean, obviously he's not a real person. And, I'm writing this and I'm writing it from his words. But there's this kind of him getting very angry and he leaves, which I think is really interesting, that kind of same kind of emotional moment of like, I am not from this world. I've sort of been brought to life through and I think about collage, right? I mean, I think Frankenstein is collage. And I think to Sarah Jane's point, I mean, I think the amount of images and flood and density, I mean, I think if you think about these large language models as just, these incredible collages of, I love this idea of flood. We are in a flood in this moment. And I think, to some extent, trying to figure out how that fits with these kind of less collage based images is one of the things I've been trying to think about. And I guess for this one, I tried to make it happen with emotion, and I'm devastated by the fact that he has left our project. And I think it's kind of this interesting, like, what does happen when this kind of all breaks down in these moments.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I actually I wanted to ask Sarah, not Sarah, Jane.
Yeah.
Jane, the doctor. I wanted to ask the doctor. I've asked because the doctor's also she's an artist, and I wanted to ask her about, yes, that's what it was. Her piece called Telephone, Whispering a Message Among Art Forms. And the main thing to remember is that telephone is a game and meant to be a beautiful and compelling sort of fun. Each thread of works in its own exhibition. And I mean, what I'm gathering from and you can tell me more about telephone, but what I'm gathering from all these works is this kind of sense of even though the subject matter all vary to certain, I mean, are a little bit different, but it's a kind of sense of, again, play, imagination. And that's why I want to hear more about telephone, Jane, and that whole sense of play, which is so important in practice, in art practice, at least for me and a lot of artists that I am surrounded by, because it kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like to say childlike innocence thing that you just go into a situation and then you just see what happens and you have fun with it, right? Anyway, tell us about telephone and then we will break it to the audience.
Great. Well, telephone actually wasn't my idea. I just had the good fortune to.
Did you appropriate it?
I just have a piece of work in it.
Okay.
And was selected for it, which
Okay,
I'm delighted about. But I can give you an overview of the project. This is the third iteration, and it's the brainchild of a person named Nathan Langford. I think that's correct, Langston or Langford. And this is the third iteration, the third time he's done this. And essentially it's based on Chinese whispers, or what he calls the game of telephone, which is the same idea that you whisper a message to someone at the other end of the telephone and continue, it gets whispered again and again and again and again, that notion of repetition. And at the end, it changes completely. Again, that notion of simulacrum and the degraded copy, where through the iteration, changes have happened and it changes its form. What he's done with telephone is, instead of doing this as just a whispered message, he's done it through the arts community, the international arts community, where it started with an original prompt, an original artwork that was sent to an artist without any explanation of what the message was contained in that original image or art form. And then the artist receiving the copy of the art form is meant to decipher what the message is and create a piece of art based on what they think the message is. Then their piece gets shared to another artist, and so on and so forth. And I think in this iteration, there's something like nearly 1,500 artists who have taken part. And I was invited to play through an old colleague of mine when I was doing my undergraduate education at the San Francisco Art Institute. She was sort of our teaching mentor in the class, and we haven't been in touch with each other for years. And I just out of the blue contacted her because AI through social media and the algorithm brought her up in my feed, and it was like, okay, I'm gonna take the chance and try and connect with her, not realizing, fully expecting that she wouldn't remember who I was at all. She did, and so we have sort of reconnected with each other, and she invited me to play the telephone game. So it's online now. It is complete, the third iteration, and the website. It's a simple thing. It is. Let me get this right. Hang on, bear with me. No, it's BBC. Hold on. It is telephone game, all one word, .art. So telephonegame.art, if you are curious about that.
Telephonegame.art. Yeah?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jane. Okay, so we're going to give it over to the floor.
Yeah.
Any questions? Anyone?
I should maybe say that my piece in the work is called The Hollow.
The Hollow.
Yeah, and it's a digital work. It's a digital collage. in essence.
Thank you, Jane. So do we have any questions? And is Kim around? Kim, do you want to say anything?
Well, yes, but I feel like when I say something, everyone will feel like this is concluded, and I
Okay, so we can say it at the end.
I'd love for you. I'm sure there must be some questions out there. I mean,
Are you shy because of the YouTube?
yes, we can turn the YouTube.
I think I can stop broadcasting for the questions, but is that all right with everyone? It might make it, or do you want me to keep? Maybe
Just edit it out.
I could, yeah, no, but it's broadcasting live, and I don't want people to feel embarrassed. Maybe if I just stop the video on the crowd.
I'd say there's probably a lot of information to take in in everything
Yes.
that we've said.
Yeah.
So that's probably as much as anything.
So
I
it's
had a question. It was just about the sort of temporal nature of using some of these language models.
I'm going to repeat your question by the thing. So, or do you want to come and say it here?
It's just that it's just in my limited use of some of these language models. There's a temporal stamp in that using the same prompt or the same, or a different language model 2 years ago gives different results. And maybe in the future, forensic analysis will say, this is a certain moment, certain time. And then also in my limited knowledge of using these models, you never get the same result with a prompt, so there's something interesting about that, and unique, and I don't know, I just think that there's something about the temporal stamp in that sort of, yes, I just brought that to mind in the conversation.
Anyone?
It's an interesting point. I think that notion of the timestamp in being missing in AI perhaps is something that there could be many ways to sort of identify that, and I think it should be identified. I think that it's important because we live in temporal conditions. In fact, Ravelli says that time doesn't exist, but that it is a human construct. And that's a really compelling idea because we live under those conditions. So we think in terms of time. And if we don't have a connection to time, or if we lose that kind of knowledge or awareness of a timestamp through AI, through a moment, it raises issues. And I think that's something that, ultimately will, sort of develop, or that we'll be able to identify in ways. And what you've just said about, these maybe very early versions of the LLM, the large language model that AI uses, perhaps that becomes a timestamp. So it's an interesting question.
I think it also, if you go back to the traditional notion of the decisive moment in photography, which is like Henri Cartier-Bresson, or photography being a direct transcription of a memory, I mean, AI completely F's all that up, doesn't it? Because I think it's not just the loss of the trace of the thing that the image is referring to. I think it's also somehow AI's, behaving that like I guess it's trying to imitate the behaviour of the human imagination, which you can't really explain anyway. But if you try and you kind of say it's kind of like an algorithmic rendition or very poor copy of what the human imagination can do, then it's creating these kind of fictional time, which is kind of warped. It's like, how would you describe time in an AI image is like a really fascinating question. The same way that because I know you're a painter, if you're looking at your painting and you make kind of fictionalized history paintings, and it's kind of interesting because AI is also making fictionalized history paintings, but it's also with another thing that's coming from somewhere that we don't know. It is coming from a black hole, and there's the presence in AI images of time that is maybe expands our definition of maybe what time looks like, or historical time. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? It's a really interesting question.
I think it's really interesting because we've kind of hinted about it during the course of the conversation about how a lot of what's happening now is very intimately tied to our kind of shift away from Newtonian physics to something that's quite quantum. And what we know in quantum physics is time is not universal. You know, it may actually be a thing that produces things like gravity and, you know, all this sort of stuff. And so our understanding of time is fundamentally changing, as well as the time. A black hole has no time. I mean, this time moves so slowly, it's like nothing's happening there. So I think that's really interesting to think about the importance of time in our kind of human existence, and what we're about to probably unravel about the non-existence of time.
Mm-hmm.
Something of that already in AI.
You were saying earlier that you're asking AI to make clocks, and
Oh
it was
my
making clocks with 5 hands.
Yes.
Which I don't know. It's just really this one for your
It's a
painting.
story about time, but it's not. It's also a story about, like, you know, the kind of the things about AI that you know that we still better than AI. But when I wanted to make a post about the Doughnut pavilion, there was a commercial that ran in the 80s in America for Dunkin' Donuts, where this guy was just like, it was just a commercial of the guy who made the donuts, and the clock went off every morning at like 3:59, and he just go, time to make the donuts, time to make the donuts, and he just walked past his bedroom doorway, time to make the donuts, time to make the donuts, and then like the second one was like, time to make the donuts, oh, I already made the donuts, time. And so I thought, like, oh, I want to do something with my time to make the donuts thing from my childhood that I remember. So and I thought, well, I was gonna like download it from the YouTube, the commercial, and then I like read all of the things that said I was gonna like lose all my, you know, I was gonna get sued and all this stuff. So I thought, like, I'm gonna just like ask AI to make me the clock. And I asked for a clock from the early 1980s with a time of 3:59 on it. AI could not do it. Went to 4 different images. I even went to like there's a big hand, and it has to be on the 12. I went to 4 o'clock just to make it easy. And the little hand has to be on the 4. And then that didn't work. So I'm like, okay, so the big hand is called the minute hand. And I literally had a screenshot that I got from AI. I mean, there were clocks with 5 handles. There were things with like a second hand on the 12, but the other hand was never on the 4. And then you realize that like it hasn't learned to tell time yet.
Wow. There you go, it's perfect answer illustrated by that. Yeah.
It hasn't scraped that data yet.
Brilliant.
So anyway, so yes, there's a lot of time in this as well.
And by just saying what you've just said, it just reminds me of the guy with the surrealists would have loved.
Charlie's thought. Yeah.
Loved this.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We have been here before many times in art history.
Yeah.
In a way, you know.
Yes.
We are. It does all feel very surreal, doesn't it, when you're looking at the image world?
That's one of the things I said in a little comment at the beginning of when you enter the pavilion, but it's like this is maybe more sort of historically big of a moment. But in the art world, we've had the urinal, we've had the camera, we've had all these sort of disruptions that threaten to kind of destabilize us, and actually we just roll over them eventually, and that's.
But I also think the timestamp is interesting, because if you think about this edition of the Wrong Biennale, so everyone is making work in response to AI for this Wrong Biennale. So in 10 years' time, what's the timestamp going to be on this Wrong Biennale? Do you know what I mean? It's going to look really, really backward, because in 10 years is centuries of digital technology time. Centuries. Think where we were 10 years ago. What we're dealing with didn't exist at all, and I think that's how fast things are moving. So we're creating this massive digital footprint, which is going to be time-stamped of the conversations about AI and photography in 2025, I think, really, with this. This is interesting. Art history.
It makes me think a little bit about the decisive moment again. And one of the things that you keep on saying is that we, at this moment, we're sort of in the present, right? So we aren't thinking about how kind of dated or timestamped this is going to be. But also, it's very fascinating to me that it's very hard in AI to ever get back to a version of a thing. You know, it's really interesting. I mean, one of the things about my project is for each one of the sentences that my dad says, you know, I do it 50 times to get the right emotion. And it's so interesting that there are 50 different takes on a thing, much like photographs, right? Like we do 50 different photographs, but to ever get back to one, I can't ever make it do the thing again. So there's this kind of strangeness of time of like not being able to actually get back to prior versions, which you would think would be very easy with AI, but is actually incredibly difficult, much like with a camera.
Yeah.
Yes.
Totally different thing. You said a couple really interesting things about how you like to put an AI image and a like analog image next to each other. And then something else about how like this new sort of mode that we're in makes people question or like think more deeply about images and where they come from and what they're for and everything, which I think is true. And I feel the same way. But I also have this other side of me that I think a lot of people share where you notice something that's AI generated and just your mind shuts off.
Yeah.
Like you're no longer interested,
Yeah.
right? So I'll find some book or some account on Instagram or whatever, and I'm like, oh, this is really interesting and cool and you know, like visually unique. And then slowly it will dawn on me like this is just someone typing away on making little prompts. And then all of a sudden, like instinctually my interest just is drained. I'm no longer I no longer want to engage with it. I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't think I necessarily should be having that reaction, but like I think it's valid. I think you know, it feels like it's not from someone as much anymore. And there's obviously a gray area. But so yeah, like I think the other side of that too is like I haven't been quite sure how to address this in my own work, where some of it has some AI things in it and some of it is purely analog. And I worry that people will see the analogs. I mean, I've had this, like I've shown people my book and they've thought that more of it was AI than actually is. Which to that side of you that becomes less interested when you realize, you know, it like devalues the whole thing.
Yes, that's interesting.
And I don't know how to think about it. I was wondering if any of you have an idea for thinking about like how to create art has these different components in it without over-explaining, like maybe just over-explaining and being very partitioned about like where things
Which
come
side
from.
you're on,
Maybe that's the solution, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm really curious when you use when you said the word devalued. Why would it be devalued? Great.
Especially amongst photography purists, when
Yeah,
it's a
right.
photograph of something in the world,
Well,
and it's not a photograph.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think my concern, and I've always thought in terms of how we're going forward, if we are going forward with this with technology, is who I'm thinking about who's being educated on this. In other words, the youngsters, this new generation who have been brought up, you know, this is what they have been brought up with, this is what they see. For us, or for those who have researched analog or are, you know, coming from an analog background or use analog both, you know, in their practice with digital technology, my concern is always this kind of once this generation gets used to seeing, like, what do you know? It's the same old. It's like, is that real or is that not real? Oh no, that's real. So how do you decipher what's real and what's not? And does that go back to what, you know, time? I mean, is this all real? What I mean, I'm in front of the audience now, but are you all real? It's all these kind of questions. Yeah, it's this new. What is this new technology basically for? Who does it benefit? Do we become slaves of this master machine, and we continue to, and we can't even get back to the original, as Sarah is saying. What does this all mean? You know, Yeah, just wanted to say that.
I think
Yes.
I think there's gonna be multiplicity of responses. So trying to find a mega response, that's a mono mega response, is like narrowing the field down itself. But asking the questions is great because it opens up,
Yes.
but we must be careful not to close down as well, because there's a finitude or an infinitude of responses that can respond to questions. So
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's like what I mean about value is that for me, the purpose of art is to communicate what it feels like to be alive, right? And you can use whatever tools you want to do that. But the reason that it's potent is because of the finitude,
Yeah.
where like you have to choose what to make, you know? You have to decide, I'm gonna spend a year working on this project, or I'm gonna spend a day working on this project, whatever. Like you're gonna put some of your limited time into something. And when I see, like part of what I like about art is that you can see it and think, oh, someone thought that was really important to like make and then show, you know? And maybe that's part of like the gut ick, which I think we're gonna be talking about in the talk tomorrow. Like that some people have against AI. And I don't know, I still think like we should be using it and interrogating it and everything. Yeah, I don't know.
but is your question also about like, because like I'm worried not about AI, I'm worried about the need to play to an audience or the need to pre-think how the audience is going to respond and
Yeah.
not just play, as you were saying, just play and regardless of what anyone else is going to think about it. But if you start like getting into the mathematics of, oh, if I do this, that might impact on your ability to be creative.
Well, I think that's it. It's like I want people to engage. I want to effectively communicate what I want to, right, with other people. And I don't know, like I think to some people using AI makes it more interesting, and to some people it makes it much less interesting.
And does it matter what they
Well, no, but you're saying like going to an audience, you know.
Yeah, but that's you make your work and then you go to but if while you're making your work you're thinking what the audience might be thinking about what you're making, then it changes your making practice.
Yeah.
I think, like Duncan, your work, part of the reason that it stood out when we were going through all the submissions, I think you're raising really, really important questions for artists about how what it is to make art. And I am probably the worst example of someone who thinks you must spend hours, if not years, making something to be worthy. I once had someone tell me if you could join the H2 and the O, you'd make your own water that you'd be putting into this, because it's like that's how important it's always been to me to craft everything. And there's having sat through 6 months of being with people who work in a way I never have worked before and really learning about it, you are reminded that there were just these other times in our history where we were having the same conversation. Like imagine when the camera was invented and all the painters were like, oh my God, like, people think that's great. And I've spent like a year making this painting and someone's photographed it. And like, who is this guy with his urinal? Like I've sculpted this thing from marble. So I think you're raising really important questions that aren't maybe new. I think this is what we're racing through again. And I think I totally get what you're saying. Like it's like and I think when you start to look through art and spend a lot of time with it, I think I said this morning, is that you do still understand when you see art. You still understand it, even if it's been made a different way. And I questioned myself that I couldn't do this project because I don't work this way. I don't understand digital art. I don't understand what like people see in it. And then you start looking at it and there are a few projects, it was just like what you said, like, oh, that's really interesting. That's really cool. Look what they did. Is it art? No, it's art. But then you find one like yours and some of the others, and you're like, that's art. You don't even think about how it was made, or it's just, it has the same qualities of everything you've ever loved in art before. And
Yeah.
I would say there's a lot of shit being made right now with AI.
But there was always a lot of shit with me.
There's a lot of shit photography.
I think that your work was very human to me. It was like it was the questions of the artist.
I think everything in here is really human, which is like I had that bias.
Thank God for
There
that.
you go.
No, I know, like
Well, Ray, what was anything to add to sorry, you wanted to ask.
Yeah, it's just this is all building, but I guess I wanted to touch on, we spoke about the scope of using language in AI image generation, and we've already started touching on the limitations of it, but I guess we spoke about the limitations of actually the process of creating it, the difficulties you come across using the technology, but also I wondered about, you know, innovation and creativity and how that comes from kind of a pre-concept before we've even had thought, and how much that gets lost before you get to the point where you're entering the prompts in to create the image. But also on the other side of bespoke things, yes, you know, art is about what does it make someone think, feel or imagine, and if that helps to even, I don't know, create that neurological pathway where an artist or a creative is able to have that spark, that initial spark, and then to be more innovative and creative. I don't think that last one was a question, actually.
Can I just answer to that? Because I think I can make a question out of it. There's a difference between marketing and making art. And I don't really like the word art because it's been sullied by our modern, you know, so maybe there's a difference between marketing and play. And when you're playing, you don't have an idea first. You just play. Kids don't go, right, I'm going to do this and it's got to be like this. They just get the mud and they play. And when you're an artist playing, it doesn't matter what you're playing with. You're just playing. And so you don't, you know, you're not, so the creativity is there because and that's what you started with playfulness. I don't know if that answers your non-question.
It answers the non-question. Yeah, I think the other is, and it might be for you, Sarah Jane, because you talk about the language and how important it is. But yeah, it's just like reflecting on the limitations of.
There are limitations, but there are limitations with everything. And actually, it's really nice to work with limitations because you push against them. And when students or young artists or young creative people go, oh, I'm so annoyed because I can't do this, I can't do that. And like, no, come on. That's a limitation. Now you've got something to push against
Absolutely.
it and come up with something else, you know, and try to climb over it. And let's see your struggle as you climb over it or through it or around it or under it. You know, anything that's seamless is really boring. So should we end there because people have been sat and listening for a long time?
Absolutely. Yes, yes. Well, thank you, Kim, for inviting all of us. And thank you, Jane, Sarah, Maria, and Sarah Jane, and all of you who made it to West Brompton.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for coming.
And I just want to thank you all for, I think it's been an amazing conversation and in the right kind of space. I love that we're all just kind of sitting in a circle having this conversation.
It's really nice.
It's really nice.
It's really nice.
Maria, you talked about the concentric circles, and after you said that, I saw it in all kinds of places in this conversation. So you talked about reaching out and looking back. Sarah Sweeney, your work is about the kind of negation of the timelines. It becomes sort of circles, circular, concentric circles. Sarah Jane, we're like just in the aftershock or something, and the aftershocks are quite like concentric circles as well.
They are.
And I was just seeing not donuts for a change, but concentric circles everywhere, and also the idea of finitude. I might be wrong about this. I always struggled with the body without organs, but it starts to feel like this kind of like letting go of the things that organize us in our lives and in ourselves, and sort of reaching outwards, and that feels very much like part of this sort of circular conversation. Was thinking, is that finitude? Like, do you lose finitude when you're a body without organs? I don't know. Maybe a topic for another day. bring Liz back, but there was something really interesting about this idea of finitude not being about an outstretched line, but about this sort of these circles and the kind of, you know, and their waves, by the way, but we'll talk about that in another conversation. So thank you, everyone. Please, I'm gonna make another pot of coffee and some tea. Just have some. Please eat donuts. We've got like millions of them. And also the pavilion's online. We flipped the switch this morning. It's live and it's at you can find it through the ROM, but also through our own. It's
It's the same domain. The Doughnut hole with a W. So hole .com. And it's on Instagram and on my website.
And in the back room.
And in the back room, I think we need to get it going again.
Gotta get it going again. We have a little like Liz through the website that we're projecting in the back room, so you can grab some stools and go sit down in the back if you like, and you're welcome to stay.
We've
and
got some
chat.
publications over there.
Yes, zines for people to look at, preferably after you've wiped your hands. They've all been warned that it might happen, so yeah, just be comfortable, have a cup of tea, and our next talk starts at 3.
3.
You know, we've got
a bit of time.
now. I want to
Thank you, guys. I'm going to I'll speak to you guys maybe next week on